So, I'm wanting to start a podcast or a conversation around around power, basically, and at the root of that is the economic system that we've chosen to kind of live within. I hesitate to kind of call it economics or preface with economics because it's almost immediately off-putting, I think, to a lot of people. It's quite dry and pseudoscientific, and it kind of strips all the juicy bits away. When in fact, what we're talking about is, it's the foundation, the contours, the container for how we organise the material world around us, how we organise ourselves, who gets to control and partition land, and who gets to control human organisation, and to what end are they doing it. And so ultimately, wrapping all of this up, this is going to be a podcast about power and how it's distributed, whether or not we hold it, and whether or not, all of this is tending to the big question: is this system tending to our well-being, to our welfare? Is it working for us? And maybe the kind of surprising question for some people is it meant to? Is this a kind of science, or a kind of adjacent to a science, or is it a story? It's a narrative. It's a perspective on the world that's not particularly tethered to empirical reality and outcomes and measuring how it's faring in terms of improving well-being for the general population. So yeah, I want to disentangle the economic story, the narrative, the stories we've been told that sort of rationalise and make sense of this system, and kind of palliate us, kind of create our kind of consent at a certain level, whether or not that's fracturing. And then I also want to look at the trajectory of movement in this system. Are we moving in the right direction? What are the kind of broad trends in terms of concentration of resources and wealth? And what are the repercussions for democracy? How does the incredible amassing of private wealth in a few hands, so for instance, like the wealth of billionaires has doubled in 3 years, doubled. Meanwhile, we're told that there is no money for alleviating child poverty, or, in the US, investing in healthcare. But there's always money for wars, and there was money in when coronavirus hit, to insulate the economy, and there was money in 2008 when bankers crashed the global financial system. So digging into all of this. So I think really critical is how this economic system operates to, and we'll get into kind of how this works, it operates to buttress and protect the powerful. Those are economic resources. And in this system, what are the repercussions for the political manifestos, the contours of the possible that we get to vote on, that kind of manage to leap through those hurdles of, hospitable kind of media, that manage in the US to kind of get the funding from the big donors? How is this shaping our democratic rights, our kind of, our basic powers? So how are our options shaped and filtered as a function of this economic system? and the incredible wealth it's producing for a handful of men, largely, not all men, structurally. And let's take it a step further. To what extent does this economic system impinge on our democracies? To what extent can we be said to be living in democracies at all? So I'm interested in all these sort of tangible, like philosophical, meaningful things for the shape of the world, for society, for the contouring of our options, the nature and possibility of democracies, our relationship with the natural world, with each other, and the shape of things to come if we continue with this economic model. Now, I know if you're anything like me, you're kind of appalled and distraught at the toll of human suffering and indeed the cruelty and barbarity of what is happening in Palestine and Gaza right now. I don't know why I'm tearing up. So I want to preface this by saying this is irrelevant to that. I think actually analysing the economic system or the power systems that kind of undergird global power between countries and buttress the US still operating in its sort of empire building superpower mode. All of this is inherently linked to the nature of the economic systems we have imposed, not just within countries, but fundamentally the international economic system that we have imposed, the West has imposed on the global South, which has directly diminished the ability of poorer countries to focus on the well-being of their citizens, to develop, to protect nascent industries, to implement strong industrial strategy, and to invest in a strong, vibrant state and strong national industries, all of which were fundamental, or most of which are fundamental to most advanced countries that managed to reach that level of kind of broad prosperity. Anyway, getting into a little bit of detail there, but the fact of US Western power, relative and political power, is a consequence of the economic and military might and the kind of the advantage they've managed to maintain, which is a direct outsprouting of this economic system. And then the other relevant feature is this economic system and its impact on the availability and the health of democracies is also a direct factor in what's allowed the horrors in Gaza to happen, but to rumble on for 10 long months. And it's a function of, we'll get into this, but it's a function of being incredibly permissive, creating, we'll get into this, conditions that are extremely hospitable, that buttress and protect the interests of the powerful and those with capital to monopolise most of the value that an economy creates, and the incredible wealth concentrated in a few hands that is the consequence. And it is this that has fractured, particularly, it's happening in all Western democracies, but particularly US democracies, where the Supreme Court has pretty much taken any limit to per person electoral spending. So you pretty much buy elections in the US. And this, in combination with the relative power of the US and the West to the global South, both of these two features are both a direct outsprouting of this economic system and directly contribute. What's happening in Gaza now, I do not believe could happen without these two facets. I feel like I'm in a race against time. It keeps getting darker and darker. Okay, I just feel like I need to push this out because otherwise I could just go over and over. Okay, so part of what we need to be doing if we are humanitarians, if we care for freedom, for improving well-being, for liberation, is analysing how and why these abuses are able to happen and how they are concomitant with our apparent democracies, liberal world order, and why the US still wields so much power over the rest of the world. And by putting the spotlight on this economic system and implemented in extreme form in the 80s and 90s, I believe we can, oh gosh, that sounds really Tory. I believe we can unravel how the US and the West still wield such power globally, and why the US still holds the reins on greenlighting genocide, atrocity, and military expansion around the globe. I think the economic story, what's become lost under all the dust and the dogma and the repetition, I think we've all forgotten underlying any economic system in democracies or in modern societies, there needs to be at the root of it kind of ethical justification. It needs to be tending on some way, at some level, to improving welfare generally. That's that's the root and the crux of it. Basically, this will be a little Basically, this will be a little podcast about politics, economics, power, who wields it, and in whose interests. But with a critical and open mind, and centering something that's fallen out of the limelight in recent years in all our focus on how we're going to pay for that, and leaving things to the market. I want to centre human needs and welfare, a habitable, healthy planet, and focusing on an economic system that can rapidly improve living standards globally, around the world. And this really seems to have fallen out of fashion in economics and even in the political sphere. We must all be kind of pragmatic and submit to these sort of artificial constraints and So at the root of this is going to be an open-ended question. What is the best way, the best broad system to implement that tends to the good? And that tends to improving welfare for the many within a country and globally, subject to the natural limits of Earth. And is this system doing a good job? Is it meant to? I want to touch a little on the funny ideas, the theory underlying this system, this vision, and start to make cracks to view through a prism what could be. Sorry to sound all Kamala. All the potential we have, particularly now when it all seems on the precipice of crumbling. Core to this podcast will be questions of autonomy, power, freedom, welfare. How do we organise us? How should we? What are the options available? What are the bounds of the possible? What if we took off our blinkers, disentangled economic theory, and actually centred intrinsic values at the heart of what we're doing? What are the possibilities for other systems of cooperation, other kinds of markets? How can we calibrate the market? What does free and fair exchange require? Does it require a certain substrata, a level of equality within thresholds? Are freedom and equality actually opposites? Or is this a story we've been sold? Ultimately, this will be a podcast about power, and the power of propaganda, and how we take it back.